This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. Today you'll meet Rachel Hester. Rachel is a passionate advocate for sustainable farming and the author of the Guide to Homestead Dairy Sheep. Rachel shares her remarkable transition from a conventional career to life on an 8.5-acre farm in central Kentucky. You'll hear how her husband's health challenges led them to discover the benefits of nutritional therapy and farming, sparking Rachel's interest in sheep as versatile and valuable livestock. From milking sheep and crafting luxurious soap to exploring the rich history of shepherding in America, Rachel dives deep into the joy and challenges of small-scale farming. She also highlights the entrepreneurial spirit required to thrive in agriculture and reflects on the simple pleasures of rural living. I cannot wait to share Rachel's story with you and how she has discovered sheep as being such a valuable livestock for not only her family, her local community, but also sharing that wisdom with all of us and a greater community. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Rachel. Hello, Rachel. Welcome to the Rural Woman Podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am so excited to dive into your story and learn all about you. So let's start off. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you got your start in agriculture.
All right. So I'm Rachel Hester, and I am in central Kentucky. And my husband always wanted to be a farmer, but his family was like, there's no money in agriculture, go to college, get a real job. And I had kind of had the same experience where I liked the thought of working with animals. I wanted to have a farm and have just some hobby critters. And my parents were like, that you're never going to make any money. It's just, it's a hobby and a very expensive one. Go get a real job. So we both kind of had this unmet desire. And I don't think we really talked about that before we got married, but after we did get married, my husband donated bone marrow and to an anonymous cancer patient, and it actually destroyed his health. And so we went to multiple doctors. They thought he had cancer at one point, then it turned out he didn't. And they were like, well, good job, you don't have cancer, go home and just enjoy not feeling healthy anymore. And I was like, well, I don't accept that answer. So a friend of mine was getting a certification in nutritional therapy, and she was able to give us some pointers, and I just knew that was the route we needed to go. So I would text her like from a grocery store and say, should I get sweet potatoes or regular potatoes? Like, how's that going to help his gut heal? And she was like, okay, you need to go to nutritional therapy school because you're asking all the right questions. You have the right mindset. So why don't you just learn this for yourself. So I did. And in the course of doing that, I learned about Joel Salatin and his lunatic farm at Polyface. So just on a whim, I found out our local library had Joel Salatin books, and I got a couple, and I would read them out loud to my husband. And it was the first time since he donated bone marrow that he actually looked passionate and excited and alive about something. He's like, I could do that. I could farm like that. And so it was a very intense whirlwind. We bought a foreclosed property and went and got chickens and ducks and geese and just put them on there because we knew that's what Joel Salatin said to do. And we were going to do Polyface, but on a micro scale, because Polyface has 800 acres and we had 8.5, which we still do. And we were going to sell organic eggs and, for $4.50 a dozen, which at that point in time was like, you're ridiculous. How dare you want that much money for a dozen eggs? And now it's just kind of funny. But in Kentucky, pretty much everyone has some backyard flocks somewhere accessible to them. So we really weren't making it. I was having a hard time really delving into nutritional therapy as a job because, again, Kentucky is in a very interesting place. Like pretty much everyone knows some basic herbalism or some basic nutrition. Like everyone knows that home cooked is best, but no one really wanted to go into the deep dive of, am I actually lactose intolerant, or if I just avoid cheese, do I feel better? Like they didn't want to look into what is gut health, what is sourcing your ingredients look like. And so we were like, okay, well, we really like this farming thing. We want to kind of lean more into that than the nutritional therapy. And so we decided it was time to bring four-leggeds on our farm. So we'd been part of an Amish herd share. We noticed that goat milk kind of sat better with us than cow milk. And we're like, well, let's just get some goats because, also that's just what you do when you have a small farm is goats after poultry is the next step. So I found this really unique breed called the San Clemente Island goats that have a higher butter fat content than most dairy goats do. And so we were going to get a starter flock of those. And we were all set up to pick those up in March of 2020. And I don't know what happened to the goats, but they were no longer an option after a couple weeks in March of 2020. Then things just were getting progressively worse. And, everyone's stockpiling on toilet paper and pasta. And I was like, we've got mullein and comfrey leaves growing in our pasture, so I don't need to stock up on toilet paper. And we can't really eat a lot of grains. So there's no point stockpiling pasta, but I'd really like to have a secure meat and milk supply. And I had been on the mission field to Romania and had sheep milk cheese. And so when I went online one evening while I was trying to not panic, I saw that there were these 2 sheep for sale. And so I texted my husband who was working at the time because he works emergency services. And I'm like, there's these 2 sheep. They're an hour from here. I Googled the breed. They've been milked historically. I think we should just get some just as like an insurance ticket. And he's like, yeah, get them. And I was like, oh, okay. So Mother's Day of 2020, we went and got these 2 Border Leicester sheep. And it was just really interesting because we noticed almost right away where they grazed, the soil just started to seem to improve. The grass got greener. The leaves weren't as jagged or harsh. Like I didn't get paper cuts when I walked barefoot along the fescue. And we were like, well, that's just kind of interesting. So my husband's like, I don't really think I want to go try to find more goats. I think we should just get more sheep. So at that point, it wasn't really an option to like find a starter flock of one breed and bring them onto your farm like you're supposed to. It was basically you just bought what was available and from people who were comfortable with you in close proximity to them. So that's what we did. So we ended up with a really mixed breed flock of sheep. And I wanted all of them for the purpose of milking. So they were all breeds that have historically been milked, but they weren't all dairy sheep specifically. So we bred all of them that fall, all of them lambed that spring. And I just started noticing that the different breeds had different temperaments. They had different trainability. They had different butterfat contents and milk amounts. And I would just start kind of talking about this online on Facebook. And folks started paying attention. They're like, most of us don't have that opportunity because we just go get one breed from one farm and that's all we have. You have multiple breeds that you're milking. So this is giving you kind of a unique perspective. And I still didn't really think we were doing anything special until we made some sheep milk soap and took it to sell at Homesteaders of America. And people were less impressed with the soap itself, but they were more impressed that it was sheep milk soap, not goat milk or some other kind. And so everyone just kept asking us over and over and over, well, how do you milk a sheep? And I was like, well, the same way you milk anything else. You just grab on and squeeze and don't let go till the milk comes out. I mean, it's not that hard. And so I realized they were more asking, well, like, how do you train a sheep to get milked? Not necessarily the action of milking a sheep, because of course everyone knows that sheep are stupid and just dumb and they want to die. So how do you A, keep them alive long enough to get milk from them, and B, convince them that you should be allowed to harvest milk from them? As I would just talk to these people, my husband and I were like, people just really don't know that much about sheep in our country. Like they don't understand sheep psychology. They don't understand, that there are species nuances, but that doesn't automatically mean stupidity. So we looked at each other and we're like, well, let's just maybe write a pamphlet or something about that. And the lady in the booth next to me was actually getting ready to start a small publishing company. And she was like, well, why don't you just write a book and I'll sell it and we could go from there. So I am now the author of The Guide to Homestead Dairy Sheep, which is currently the only book on the market on the topic of raising sheep for milk. And folks will ask me, well, how did you get a book contract for such a unique topic? And I'm like, I literally slipped on a banana peel and got a book contract. Like, I wasn't looking for one at the time. I wasn't expecting it, but it's been really humbling and amazing to see how much interest there is in this topic of, raising sheep for milk. So in the course of writing the book, I discovered, a friend of mine who raises sheep, and I would compare notes. And we're like, we've been part of a cow herd share for years. We've been part of a goat herd share for years. And we've just not noticed the increase in our health since we started drinking sheep milk. So when I was doing research for the book, I actually discovered quite a few studies from overseas where they're noticing sheep milk does actually have some health benefits that's not available, or it's available in smaller amounts in the other milks. So that was a unique little discovery to find while I was doing research.
That gives me so many things that we are going to dive into about all of the things that you've done in relatively a short amount of time. And, when I look back at where your story started and I hear, your parents and your husband's parents saying like, you can't get into farming, or like, this is not a job that like is a real job. And I laugh at myself because I always say, like, back when I had a real job and I went for my 9 to 5, like, to be honest, like, before I met my husband, like, it was never a dream of mine to be a farmer in any sort of way. I couldn't keep a houseplant alive. I'm doing better now.
They look great behind you.
Yeah. But like, that just wasn't something that I thought was a career opportunity. I'm curious, looking back now, that kind of negative aspect or negative view towards farming and agriculture not being a real job. I'm curious what maybe the perspective of maybe your parents and your in-laws are now that you've been doing this for a number of years now.
My parents still have no clue why I'm doing this. I mean,
mine either.
Like, why? Why are you doing this? And I'm like, well, I'm healthier than I was before. Like it's funny because our grandparents have actually caught on to our why and are a little bit more happier than I think our parents are, which is interesting because our grandparents still remember, having milk delivered at the back door before all the pasteurization laws were passed. My husband's grandpa still lives on 40 acres where he has a small herd of baldy cows. So, I mean, I think our grandparents' generation get it a little more because they've lived there and they understand, like, the good of work and, like, the satisfaction of being exhausted and sweaty and sore after a long day of work with that feeling of accomplishment, whereas I think our parents' generation are still more of the mindset of, well, we worked hard to get to this lifestyle of convenience and you gave up all that convenience to go work. Why did you do that? Like, I don't get it. So, I mean, it's, there's other family issues. So them not loving for farm isn't high on the list of things I'm devastated about. I'm trying to be very tactful right now.
We'll talk about that after we stop recording.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Maybe call a psychologist while you're at it. No.
Yeah. Honestly, though, like, I think this is like a really typical conversation, and it's good to have because there's so many of us who are of the age where maybe we're doing something that our parents never envisioned us doing, to know that we're not alone in that and that we can still, have these relationships where they don't understand, and it's okay that they don't understand. We don't need them to, right? Like it's, this is the path that we wanted and this is what we're doing.
Yeah, I see that question a lot on like women in agriculture boards and whatever's, where people are like, we're moving to a farm and we're so happy we finally found our life purpose, and our families are just so negative about it or devastated or not supportive or whatever. Like, what do I do? And, most of us who've been in this for a while are like, you gotta do what you feel called to do. Like, it'd be nice if they were supportive, but like really the issue is, are they tearing it down and trying to keep you from doing it? Like if they're doing that, then you need to change some things on your end. But if they're not doing that and they're just not supporting you and they're not excited about it, they're allowed to have their own emotions. They're allowed to feel their feelings. You're not responsible for that. Obviously, we wish they were happy with us, but if they're not, they are allowed to have those emotions. So I think farming has forced my husband and I to really address codependency issues we both come from and get to a place where it's like, if you feel you're feeling, that's not my responsibility. I mean, like, obviously I love you. I want to cheer you up. But if you're just darn determined to be grumpy, like, that's fine. I got chores to do. I'm going to go hang out with the sheep.
We don't have time. We don't have time for this. We have sheep to milk. Yeah,
like,
okay.
I do not have time for drama right now. Yeah. So if you're just going to be dramatic, go have fun. I got to do something that's not dramatic. So
exactly. So good. Thank you for sharing that. That I know a lot of people are relating to you right now, including the one you're staring at. So
it's nice to know that we're not alone, but it's like, yeah, I mean, if you really embrace homesteading or small farming or agriculture or small business and stuff, you're not going to be successful if you don't budget your own emotions, and if you don't budget your time, and, taking responsibility for other people's emotions because they have their reasons is not going to help you succeed. So you really have to learn boundaries real fast. So, and if you don't, the animals will teach you those boundaries very quickly, because I am responsible for my sheep's parasite load. I am not responsible for my mother or mother-in-law's emotions. So,
oh my God, we're going to stitch that on a pillow. So I want to get back to, you envisioned when you were going to start in the four-legged critter journey that you were going to go into goat's milk. And then obviously that didn't work out. I'm curious, now that you've been doing this a couple years, tell me about the different breeds that you have on your property now, and, the different breeds that you've had over time, and what that's looked like for you in terms of milk production.
So when I first started farming, or when we first started with the sheep, I came at it from a nutritional therapy perspective. So I wanted to make the world's best ingredients available to my community. And what I learned is that my community didn't understand the value financially of this food if I was going to invest in raising it the way I wanted to. The other thing is I didn't realize was, if you're producing all your own dairy, and I mean, we love cheese, we love butter, it's not just liquid milk that you drink once a day. I mean, if you look at your entire dairy needs for a year, you need to be keeping more milk on your property than I originally understood that I needed to. So I had originally envisioned having, like a raw milk creamery where, people could come get all of their dairy needs from our property. But then we quickly realized we didn't have enough pasture or enough good forage for our sheep, and we didn't have sheep that were producing a large amount so that we could do that and still have enough for ourselves. So it was like, even if we wanted to have a customer base, I didn't think we were producing enough at that point to produce food for our community if we wanted to eat it ourselves. So we kind of switched gears to, I do make sheep milk soap and sheep milk shampoo, and I do have that available sometimes. And that, actually having the value added product, has been a much better route for us to go on to, since we only have 8.5 acres. So right now our property can really only handle maximum 30 sheep. 20 would actually be better. And since we have such rare breeds, we really need to have multiple rams so that we can keep the genetic diversity going and we don't have to keep traveling states and states and states away to get fresh genetics. So right now we have purebred Gulf Coast natives, which are a land-raised heritage breed from the American South, and they're on the Livestock Conservancy listed as critically endangered. So what that means is that they're kind of bulletproof. Like, we rarely have to worm them. They lamb without hardly any assistance. I mean, they're excellent mothers, and their milk is incredibly creamy. They also have very small carcasses. It takes them a solid 2 years to grow into maturity, and they only produce about a pint of milk a day with lamb sharing, and that's only for about 3 solid months. And as soon as I take those lambs off, their milk supply decreases right away. So that kind of adds a trickiness to managing them for dairy, but that has helped me understand, like, there are some circumstances where getting a really expensive dairy specific breed just isn't possible for people. So like, I had one lady from Arizona come up this last year at Homesteaders of America, and she was like, I just want to thank you because we cannot raise other like high producing breeds where we're at in Arizona. It's just too arid. But we got localized Navajo churros, and they produce smaller amounts of milk, but we can breed them whenever we want to, and we can have milk if we just manage them differently. So, I do make some people who are like really hard and heavy in the dairy sheep world, I irritate them because they're like, you're promoting non-dairy specific breeds. And I'm like, well, historically, a lot of people milked sheep and they weren't dairy specific breeds. It was just they were using what they had that was naturalized to their area. And there is a time and place to kind of move back towards that peasant farming mindset, if you will, if you want to be sustainable. So I have the Gulf Coast natives, and then I also have crossbred sheep that all have dairy genetics. So they all have East Frisian, and then they all have some Awasi or some Lacone, and then they're mixed with a different heritage breed. And that's just because that's what was available. I have found that if you're not really super picky about your breeder for East Frisians, which is like the Holstein of the sheep world, they are really, really fragile. They get mastitis on a dime. They have hoof issues. They have a special skin cancer they get that other breeds of sheep don't get. And so breeders of East Frisians get a little irritated at me again because they're like, you're telling people East Frisians are more delicate. And I'm like, well, they are more delicate. I mean, a Jersey cow and a Holstein cow is more delicate than, say, a Longhorn or an Angus cow. They just are. They're putting all their dietary protein into milk production. That's not a bad thing. It's just if you've never shepherded before, or if you've shepherded, hardy meat breed before, and then you get a high producing East Frisian, you need to know your management style can't be the exact same. So I prefer the Lacone breed, which is the dairy sheep from France. They just tend to be a little bit more hardier, but they're also more rare than the East Frisians. So we haven't really done a ton of investing in that. I did find one dairy in Missouri that imported semen from France a few years ago. So I'd like to get a ram from them at some point, but we just haven't done that yet. So I think your question was, what breeds did you milk? I don't remember what the question was at this point.
Yeah, no, that is. And I'm, you've written your book and you've obviously done your research on the different breeds. Obviously, milking a sheep, like you said, is not super common, or people don't really realize that you can milk a sheep. And I'm always remiss if you haven't ever seen the movie like Meet the Parents or whatever. Whenever we say like milking animals, like I always think of like milking the cat, like when he's talking about milking the cat. But I always laugh because I remember the first time I met a sheep dairy farmer and I was like, are you kidding? Like you can, and again, like, of course you can milk this sheep, right? Don't milk your cats. But I'm curious through your research, was milking sheep in North America a more common practice and then it went away, or has it just never been something that's very common in North America?
So shepherding in general in America is very interesting because it's actually really, really deeply fraught with politics. And I didn't really know that until this year. There was actually a concerted effort by the cattle industry to get rid of shepherding, and they wanted cows to be the main animal we raised. I still don't have all the details about that, but I do know in the Southwest and west of the Mississippi, I mean, there were assassinations and wars and like battles fought over grazing grounds between cowmen and shepherds. So there is that dynamic at play as well. As far as milking sheep was, again, targeted by the government during the Industrial Revolution. So as humans were moving out of the countryside into the cities. Factory owners understood that they needed a good mass producible protein source for their workers, or their workers were going to die because they had to work so freaking hard in the factories. And, milk was a food they were familiar with. And it was, you didn't have to raise up the milk for 2 years before you harvested. It was just a protein source right there. They discovered that you can raise cows in confinement. You can feed the cows leftover brewer's grains from people who are making beer. So it's a larger amount, a longer time. The cow can be pregnant while you're milking them. And so it just fit a factory model more than a sheep does, where unless the sheep is a dairy sheep, they're only going to be in milk for 3 to 6 months out of the year. And then they're dry for 6 months. And you have to breed them every single year, get much smaller amounts. And sheep flatly refuse to be raised in confinement. They do not want any part of an industrial system. They will just die. Which, some people make the argument, well, cows don't do well either. Well, the cow will live long enough where you get a harvest, and the sheep's just like, no, I'm dead. Goodbye. So in England, there was actually a concerted effort that the media joined in of writing articles of, look at farmer so-and-so. He's a progressive, loyal farmer. He sold all his sheep and he bought cows and he's milking them so that the factory workers can have their milk, and long live the queen. Like, it was very, very targeted, where they would then go and say, well, Farmer Joe, he's still raising his sheep. He must not love his countrymen because he's not, contributing to whatever. And I don't know if we had anything quite that targeted in America per se, just because I don't know that we just didn't have the rich culture that, say, England did of milking sheep. Another thing was, like, in Scotland, there was a lot of milking sheep, and they were trying to, crush the Scottish culture because they were tired of Jacobite rebellions. So the sheep actually were a huge part of changing the Scottish culture when they got rid of the local breeds and they brought in industrial breeds. And they said, you're only raising these sheep for this particular choice. And they actually displaced a lot of Scottish peasants to move sheep into that area. So, as I've been doing research, it's like, there's like this horror corner chapter of history that is just all pertaining to sheep and peasants and industrialism and propaganda and all this stuff that I had no idea about when I wrote my book. So I'm still trying to get to the bottom of it, because it's not overt. Like, these people wanted to be sneaky because they didn't want caught. They wanted to just make money and have their agenda pushed. And so, people with agenda don't typically want to be seen as the people with the agenda. They just want the agenda to happen. So it's kind of hard to get names and dates and places of what exactly was done. But I am starting to kind of stumble in on, like, wow, there was actually some really intense history going on around sheep and the sheep milk.
I had no idea that question was going to go that way. And now I feel like there needs to be like a Netflix series about like what happened to sheep milk.
So sad, though. It would be so sad. It would be like Braveheart on steroids, and then Innocent died. Like, that would be the most depressing Netflix special ever, but we would be so educated by the end of it. So...
But then we can flip it around and be like, there's people who are trying to bring it back.
True.
And then we can have like the success story of you and your farm and everybody who is pushing for the sheep milk. I love that you had talked about Joel Salatin, like, on a smaller scale. Like, he has 8,000 acres and we have 8, kind of thing. And I love that small farms are, working with what they have and taking what they have, and the realization of what my output can be. Like, I can have this much milk, and if I was just to sell it raw as is, or I can have a different product that comes from it and have all of these bits. So talk more about the development of kind of those add-ons and those extras with the shampoo and the soap and even the wool from these sheep. What are you doing with everything that this tiny herd is giving you?
Right. So, there is not a single part of the sheep that can't be used if you have a traditional small scale mindset. Their hair grease, which is called lanolin, is actually incredibly healthy for our skin, and our bodies can absorb it quickly. Their poop, like I said, it immediately started improving our soil. Their horns have been used for instruments. Their intestines have been used for instruments. Like, all the parts of the sheep can be used somehow to, edify and add health and wonderfulness to you, but you have to know what to do. So I do actually spin my own wool, so I know how to wash it. I know how to spin it. I knit and crochet it. And so The wool is not actually an area where I have done a ton of business because, again, wool has been targeted by the plastics industry who wants to push synthetic fibers. There's a lot of, I don't say this rudely, but ignorance when it comes to wool. So to sell wool, you really need to either you're signed up for educating your audience, your customer, or you have a ready customer base. So there are fiber festivals in our country where people will drop an appropriate amount of money down on a skein of yarn because they value it. I just haven't taken the time to travel to all of those places because by the time I got all the infrastructure to process all my wool, I got pregnant, and postpartum and spinning don't go together. So the wool is an area I want to really kind of improve my business area in the future. I just haven't done that yet. But in the meantime, I mean, I knit all of our winter clothes at this point. I've knit wool long johns. I'm spinning the wool to then knit my own winter coat. I've knit work gloves. Ladies are like, I don't know how to convince my husband to buy sheep. I'm like, knit him a pair of wool socks and say, we can grow this in our backyard. It will sell them on it. So we've actually seen a huge improvement in our health again as we moved away from synthetics and plastics more towards wool and natural fibers. Our immune systems have improved. My endocrine system has improved. You know, wool has antimicrobial, antiviral properties to it. It wicks away moisture so you don't get chilled. So wool is just a really fascinating topic. I am planning on writing a book just on wool and wool processing in the future. I just don't know when that's going to happen because, again, toddler, they don't help you make deadlines very well. So that's the wool. But going to the value added portion of it, you know, like when I started learning how to make soap, I was like, this is stupid easy. Like the scariest, worst part of this is you have to learn to work with lye, which is a chemical. But once you understand just some basic safety rules of it, it's not that hard. And so I was like, I never really pushed the sheep milk soap. It just kind of sold itself because the value of, you know, hand milled soap in small batches with real ingredients, like that value is already understood for the most part in most of our circles. So I don't really have to pitch, here's why homemade soap is better than like Dawn soap, for example. It also helps, like when I started making my own shampoo from the sheep milk and, you know, animal fats and natural oils and that kind of stuff, I have never been able to grow my hair very much longer than just below my shoulders. And once I switched to this homemade soap, my hair is very thick and lush and the longest it's been and the healthiest been. Like it's gotten much more plumper. My braids are thicker now just from switching hair products. And I thought that was just me. So I gave some soap to some friends. And I'm like, just see what you think. And they're like, oh, our hair is just really thin and limp and it's not shiny or whatever. I have to do all these hair treatments. And they'll call me a week after using my shampoo and they're like, our friends are noticing how much better our hair is. So it just, with those products, it helps that they kind of sell themselves. They already have a reputation across the board. If it's goat milk, sheep milk, coconut milk, people already know it's better. And then when I explain, like, you know, sheep milk has unique health properties that you're getting through the soap and the shampoo, you know, that also helps too. So when we were selling eggs or selling milk, our profit margin was not there. Like we were lucky to break even. When I sold the soap, I have a 50% profit margin. And I mean, that's across the board, hands down. So moving into value added products has on a small farm, because I can't scale up very much more than I already am. Like I am landlocked. So I can't just add in more use to milk. So I have more milk for me and other people. I'm kind of stuck with what I've got. But if I'm making soap, I can calculate in enough milk to set aside for the soap, or like, you know, if something happens to my freezer and the milk, you know, gets kind of weird, I can still turn it into soap. It doesn't affect the soap quality, and I'm redeeming something that I would have to throw out otherwise. So, you know, when you're on a small scale, you have really narrow margins to work with, like you're landlocked, or you can't increase the animal population on your property, or, you know, you're bound by the laws of your region. But if you can make a value added product where you're still offering people a quality thing and saving them the hassle of having to learn how to use lye or how to invest in the molds and the pots and pans and all the things, then that's where we found our actual profit lies as a small farm.
And I just think like the value added from small farms, or even farms that are multi-generational and they've always just done this one thing to make that profit, and then they find that one little thing that no one would ever think of to make that profit and to make it a valuable thing to have. I always just like, I'm always I root for the entrepreneur in anything, but the value added entrepreneur, I'm always so fascinated by it, and I'm always cheering you on.
Yeah, well, and someone explained to me this last October at Homestead of America. One person in the audience said, "How did you learn all this stuff?" And I said, "Well, I'm just a geek deep down inside. I'm a nerd. I like useless bits of information. I like seeing graphs and numbers and comparing it to. I'm weird that way. I don't want it about anything that would actually give me like a real job with a real paycheck, like." Nothing with an alphabet soup. But if it's like sheep milk and the vitamins and minerals in, Ukraine versus Albania, I am there. And so this other lady came up afterwards and she goes, you need to understand something. When you're selling your book or you're doing farm consultations or you're giving lectures, she goes, you're not teaching us something that anyone could just go out and learn. We're sitting here listening to you, paying you because you went to those overseas universities and found those articles that I would never even think to go look for. And I'm paying you for that, brainwave and moxie you had to go talk to people in Eastern Europe that other people don't think to talk to, getting their information, putting it in an understandable package where I can just flip open a book, look at it, and then go take care of my sheep. And she's like, I really think people need to understand that. Like, we'll pay you for the convenience of having a ready-made thing we can plug and play so we can succeed. And I was like, I'm really glad she said that because I undersell myself. I have a hard time charging prices for things. Like I have a hard time charging $10 a bar for my soap because I wouldn't go pay a $10 bar of, for $10 for a bar of soap. I just bought sheep and learned how to make it myself. But, if you're a mom with 3 kids and you just bought a property and all you can handle is eggs and all your kids have eczema, I've had moms say, oh my gosh, thank you so much. We couldn't find anything that worked on our kids' skin. Your soap is actually helping our kids' skin. When are you going to have more? And I'm like, when I figure out how to manage my kid and my time and that kind of stuff. So that is the irritating thing about my soap business right now is it's been kind of like start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. But yeah, the entrepreneurialness is how you're going to survive as a small farm. As you find a niche product, you find people who already value that product already, and you're just offering them the convenience of here. It's right here. All you have to do is just plunk down the cash. So,
and honestly, like I think it can go back to the conversation that we had before of like, why would you do all of this hard work and all of this stuff? Because there are people who value it, and there's the people that value that convenience factor. After talking to you, Rachel, I'm not going to go buy a sheep and milk it and make soap, but I would go find somebody who would do that because of the benefits of XYZ, right? So, welcome to entrepreneurship, baby.
we do not like raising chickens. I like chicken eggs. I like chicken meat. I don't necessarily like chickens. I have friends who love their chickens, and I'm happy for them. I will keep chickens for eggs because that makes sense for me economically, but there's a farmer up the road and he raises Cornish crosses and he gives us a discount if we buy in bulk, and we will support him 1,000%. So I don't have to raise those ding ding smelling Cornish crosses. And, no offense to anyone who loves Cornish crosses, I'm just saying like, it's okay that we ourselves don't do everything. It's better even if we, build a community and support one another. And, I'm buying his Cornish crosses and he's buying yarn for his wife's Christmas present for my sheep. And it works.
Absolutely. That's community, right? And that's how we keep things going. So I want to talk more about your book. Tell us everything you want to tell us about it. Most importantly, where can people find your book?
So it is the Guide to Homestead Dairy Sheep. It is basically the book I wanted to have when I started milking sheep and I couldn't find anywhere on the market. There just aren't that many books on shepherding, period, but there's only one book I could find on raising sheep for milk and how to get milk from them sustainably, and it's out of print. So I have everything from here's how sheep digestion works so that you can figure out how to feed them well, because, grass-fed versus grain-fed is a big controversy right now. And so I actually walk you through, like, here's when you want to be grass-fed, and here's when you should feed them some grain, but here's the grains you should feed them, and here's why grain-fed versus grass-fed has concerns around it. I talk about ram management because artificial insemination with sheep is actually a lot more involved than with cows. So it really is more economical to have a ram on your property if you're going to breed sheep and raise them for milk. I talk about that dynamic. I talk about how to manage your ram well. I talk about breeding and setting everyone up for breeding well. I do talk about setting up for lambing season, watching your flock to recover from lambing, because lambing is a really big, intimidating thing to people. And then I talk about how to train a sheep. There are actually some dynamics with sheep psychology that, if you know, will make training a sheep a lot easier for you. And then, of course, I have a chapter on, like, here's how you get the milk actually out of the sheep into your bucket and into your refrigerator. So, and I have a couple of recipes in that book. I am currently working on another book that is a cookbook on sheep milk recipes, because most of the shepherds that I know who milk sheep, they tried to just take cow milk recipes and use sheep milk instead. And that doesn't actually work, because of the fats and the enzymes and the proteins in sheep milk are different from cow milk. So I'm actually talking to like traditional dairy shepherds in Romania and getting their recipes. And then this year will be us trying out their recipes to make sure they work. And then we'll go put that into a book as well. But in the meantime, you have the first book, which just tells you how to get the sheep and get milk out of them. And there's a couple recipes for you to play with in the back.
Amazing. And where can people find the book?
So it is available on Amazon. You can also get it from my website, which is whoopsiedaisyfarm.com. And you can get it from my publisher. It's sawdustpublishing.com.
That's amazing. And I will link those in the show notes so people can find the book and find you and connect with you. Rachel, it has been a pleasure talking to you today. My last question for you is, what is the most rewarding part about being a rural woman for you?
I think just the simple pleasures. Like, it's just nice to go out during the golden hour when the sun goes down, but it's still light outside, and the sheep are chewing their cud, and I can see their fleeces come in, and I know that I've done my due diligence and everyone around me is at peace. The world can be going to hell in an absolute handbasket, but my flock on my property and my family, we have good, nutritious food. We have good, wholesome fabric that is literally growing in our backyard. You know, we have healthy animals who know their names and come to us and trust us and give us their bodies for our sustenance. And we're just happy. And it's just such a blessing to just be at peace.
I love that. Such a good answer. It's perfect.
Oh, thank you.
Rachel, for the folks who would like to connect with you after the show, where can they find you online?
I have my website, which is whoopsiedaisyfarm.com. I also have Instagram and Facebook, which is Whoopsie Daisy Farm. And then I have been exhorted, encouraged, and begged and pleaded to dust off my YouTube channel. And I'm doing my best to comply with that. So I do have YouTube. It's Whoopsie Daisy Farm. And I'm trying to update it weekly. I just started that. So we'll see how it goes.
Perfect. And those links will be in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you. Thank you so much, Rachel, for sharing your story with us today. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been fun.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and admin support from Kim & Co. Online. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Carrie Munven from Laystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman Podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon.